The views and opinions expressed on this program are those of the participants and do not reflect the views of BronxNet or the program underwriters.
BronxNet. Your voice, your views, your vision.
Coming up on today's verdict, we talk with a criminal law expert on the hot topic of street harassment and your rights as a victim. Plus, we will meet a grassroots organization here in New York that is taking a stance against street harassment and how you can help. So stay right here because today's verdict starts right now. Welcome to today's verdict, the show that gives you your legal rights and options. I'm your host and trial attorney for the next 30 minutes, David Lesch. Whistles, catcalls, and lewd come-ons are all too familiar to people in New York City who say they are being harassed multiple times a day as they walk down the street. But are they really being harassed, and is it a crime to whistle out at someone? Here to set the record straight on harassment and the criminal charges involved is criminal law expert Babe Howell, an associate professor at the CUNY School of Law. Professor, welcome to the show.
Thank you.
All right, let's get down to the legalities of it. We're talking about sexual harassment. Legally, when we talk about sexual harassment, what do we really mean?
Okay, well, what we mean when we're talking about public places are a set of crimes, actually. We don't use the term sexual harassment for any of them. We have forcible touching, which is a misdemeanor. We have sexual abuse, which is touching without consent. Force isn't necessary. We have public lewdness, and we have harassment, which may or may not be sexual. Like if somebody is following you around a public place, it's the conduct that makes sexually suggestive language actually a crime.
Okay, let's take a step back now, because when we're talking about any crime, we're really talking about an intent, right? A mens rea, a state of mind. Do you have to be thinking a certain way when you're committing these crimes, or is it's not really talking about an accidental touching, are we? It's
not accidental. For forcible touching, you have to intend basically to use force. For sexual abuse, you actually have to do the touch. It might be less, but for sexual gratification should be the intent. But we could infer that if you're rubbing up against someone, say in a subway in a certain way, we can infer intent from the conduct.
Okay, so we're talking really 4 different types of crimes.
That's right. And harassment at this level would probably be a violation, not a crime, but the other crimes are misdemeanors.
Okay, now with many types of crimes, you see that there's an actual touching, a battery, you know, there's actually a hand being put on somebody. But as you said earlier, it's not always the case. There are times when you might have an harassment that does not involve a touching, am I correct?
Absolutely. Public lewdness could involve exposing yourself to someone. That's pretty common, unfortunately, in New York City.
We don't have to get too graphic, but I'm sure there are other things that people can do to themselves in front of somebody else.
Right. Public lewdness also covers if somebody was kind of masturbating over clothing in a way that makes another person uncomfortable. You can't do that in public.
Okay, that's over clothing. It doesn't even have to be with your clothes off.
Right. And none of the touching has to be under clothing either for forcible touching or for sexual abuse. If you touch someone on their thigh, yeah, that could be sexual abuse.
Okay, but that's a touching. Right. We know that. I'm still curious as to what you can do, you know, to yourself. I mean, there's always been the flasher, you know, that we've always seen from, you know, from television or from different things. That one we always know, that the guy in the trench coat. Am I correct? But there, as we said earlier, there are other ways to make somebody feel uncomfortable. Am I correct?
Yes.
And those come under which particular crime?
Well, it's going to be public lewdness if it's a lewd, like sexually explicit act, and it would be harassment if there's a course of conduct where you follow someone around a public place or say things that make them uncomfortable. So there could be, if there's, you know, repeated comments.
Like a pattern, you mean?
Right.
All right. Well, let me ask you a question in terms of, you kind of hit on it for a second. You were talking about some of the verbal comments, obviously, that are made. If I said something or somebody said something to someone else that would be considered to be sexual and lewd in nature, is that a crime?
Probably in a public place or on the street, it's not going to be a crime if it's just saying something, if it's just a whistle, if it's just a comment, isolated.
And by the way,
it's probably not enough.
Whistles different than actual words that come out, or it would be under the same genre?
All expression, right. And you would kind of need a conduct. If you whistled and then followed me for several blocks, you could get arrested for harassment.
Okay, so if somebody's sitting across from you in a subway car, and they make a suggestive remark about your clothing or what you look like under your clothing or what they would like to do to you, is that considered to be a crime?
Probably not. If there's a threat, then that changes. It could be a crime, but not just saying, just talking. Okay,
well, some people would say that some people would consider those words threatening. What would be considered threatening?
Well, typical threats are imminent. I will do X to you, and they're usually about violence, physical injury.
That they will do the forcible touching. In
right.
other words, so that would fit under that crime. Slippery slope there, because what somebody else might be saying to you is what might be lewd in terms of how you look. That seems to be fine, but once they say, and I want to do this to you, which is a touching, then that's considered to be a crime.
Right. I mean, even saying I want to touch you in this way is probably not getting to the threat. I mean, an isolated, you look great, I'd like to do this, is probably, and probably not that polite, is probably not going to be captured under these crimes.
Let's give an example to the viewer. Give me an example where one of these four comes up.
Okay, so forcible touching is going to be groping. It includes grabbing or squeezing. It doesn't have to be serious force. You're going to see the sexual abuse where somebody also rubs up against someone. And either of those are misdemeanors. You can end up having to register as a sex offender for 10 years.
Yeah, I was taking a look at that now. So it's a 10-year registration, so that's a lot. And yet it's a misdemeanor, but it's still 10 years, am I correct?
Yes.
Can it turn into a felony at any point?
Yes. So two things. One is, typically you would need to be convicted twice of forcible touching or sexual abuse, or one of each, to have to register as a sex offender under the Sex Offender Registration Act. Or if the victim's less than 18. And then the question, could it become a felony if you're convicted 3 times of those kind of sexual offenses in a 10-year period? Then that elevates it to a felony.
All right, well, Professor, we have a lot more to get back to, so we have to take a quick break. But when we come back, we will turn the discussion to victim rights and hear how some New Yorkers feel about street harassment. We will be right back.
So here are the keys.
Congratulations, it's officially yours. I'm sure you'll have many happy years here.
Except for you, because you'll be gone 3 years from now, struck down by the same disease that got your father. So you won't be around for them. And sadly, it could have been detected early with a simple test, but you didn't have it. Okay, who wants to check out the backyard?
For a list of tests every man should have, go to ahrq.gov.
Welcome back to today's verdict. I'm your host, David Lesch. We want to hear from you, so send us your questions, comments, or show ideas to davidlesch@BronxNet.org, or check us out on Facebook at www.facebook/todaysverdict. Joining us during today's discussion on street harassment and your rights is Associate Professor at the CUNY School of Law, Babe Howell. Once again, Professor, thanks for joining us. Let's get back into the courtroom now, if we could. You've identified your perpetrator on the subway or on the bus, and maybe you've even taken a picture. You've given it to the police, and the police have tracked down the individual. Tell me, what's the next stage? What ends up happening in terms of the criminal prosecution?
Okay, so the complainant, the person who reports this to the police, will be asked to, fill out an account of what happened. It might only be a couple of sentences, really, describing what happened and swearing it to be true. The prosecutor may call and interview that witness too. But typically, these are misdemeanors, and they go to misdemeanor prosecutors who are inundated with quality of life, victimless crimes. And unfortunately, these cases can get a little bit lost in the system. Often people will take pleas to lesser charges, or cases may even be dismissed, but there could be mediation, there could be community service, or there could be a conviction or a plea to the charge. Oftentimes the victim won't actually know exactly what happened.
Well, that's what I was going to say. It would seem to be so hard just to even know who this person was, because they could just vanish right into the crowd. So if you're lucky enough to get your cell phone out and to take a picture, or if somebody else is lucky enough to hold him, then that would be different. But by the way, I'm jumping to the conclusion that it's the him. Is it always a him, or are there females who do this as well, by the way?
I think that it happens among, it could be a guy or it could be women, and it could be kids daring other kids. It could be a lot of different circumstances lead people to act inappropriately. I do think the majority of offenders and repeat offenders tend to be men.
I'm sorry, the offenders are men.
And the victims tend to be women or LGBT or otherwise vulnerable populations.
Okay. The statement obviously has to be very detailed on that the victim actually fills out.
Doesn't have to be that detailed. I mean, a typical complaint may say at 5 p.m. on the 6th train, a man rubbed up against my buttocks with the front of his pants or something like that, or with his hand.
Now, you had said earlier that because it's a misdemeanor, it looks like the prosecutors are inundated with so many. Do they just pick and choose which ones they feel they want to go after? And if so, how do they decide which particular sexual harassment prosecutions they want to handle?
I mean, I think prosecutors really are the most interested in crimes with victims. But when you when you keep getting lots and lots of marijuana cases, bikes on the sidewalk, all these other crimes, you can lose track of those cases with victims. There can be issues of proof if you don't get that photograph. You're just kind of overwhelmed. And our police and our prosecutor's office, in my opinion, are spending too much effort on the victimless crime, and that's too bad, because they want to do these cases too, I think. Okay, and suggestions that you would make to a potential victim or who is not being heard by the DA, what would you say? I mean, you should get a friend, you should try to call, you should organize around community hotspots and try to encourage the prosecutor to go ahead with your case if that's what's important to you. You might choose, I think mediation would be good for this person. I think, most people spend at least a day in the system. So you might think, punishing somebody by giving them a lifelong conviction and 10 years as a sex offender is kind of using a very big hammer against a very small fly. So, you should try to contact the prosecutor and try to let them know what you'd like to see happen. I want to get one last question before we let you go. Does this seem to be like an area of the law that is growing or shrinking, or something else? I think it's growing in terms of statutes that cover this area of the law. But we still have a problem with, really arresting perpetrators. We need more folks out there looking for them and pursuing the cases in the criminal courts because of the other cases. Okay, we're actually going to keep you here, by the way, because we have some packages we want to go to. We've been talking to the legal experts about street harassment, but we really wanted to know what your reaction might be if you saw someone being harassed in public. Would you try to help, or would you walk away? Let's hear what some people had to say.
If I saw a woman getting harassed, I would jump in. I think that society kind of has a problem with getting in the business of others. But I think being a bystander is just as bad as doing something yourself, I think the most important thing to do in that sort of situation is try to stop it, or at least handle the situation as it is occurring, because, once that person gets off the subway, they can disappear into a multitude of people and they may very well get away with it. But if you can do something in the moment and actually, just a quick word, it's like, hey, I don't think she appreciates that, that can go a long way.
I guess it really depends on the situation, because, if someone if it's like the other day I saw like a homeless man talking to some woman, and she seemed like couldn't tell if they were like supposed to be together or if she wasn't having it. And it really depends if it's affecting the other person or if they look like they need help. If like it's not bothering anybody, then I guess nobody really cares.
I'm going to NYU, so I've only been here in New York for like about a week and a half now, and I've already seen a lot of what you're talking about. There's a lot of, I think, misogynistic harassment against women here that I've seen, at least, being a guy. And I come from the Midwest, and being a Midwesterner, it's very like in my culture to, the right thing to do is to step in a situation like that. I think that if one person kind of takes off a hands-off approach and is disinterested and thinks that they're not going to really be able to make a difference, then that, like in mass, creates a butterfly effect, and no problems are ever going to be solved if everyone just kind of steps down.
Well, you know, it's nice to hear that certain people might come to the aid of somebody else. I would think that some people might not also. With respect to your experience in this type of area, do most people help out, or do they look the other way and walk away?
I've seen both. I see more people, especially when there's just some very unwelcome or rude comment, not saying anything or doing anything, which is unfortunate because we cannot, courts, crimes, prosecutors, even police can't stop this. Only people really can organize to prevent this kind of harassment.
But there is a risk of getting up and walking over to a complete stranger who is harassing somebody in a certain way, because this is still, New York City. It's still a subway. You don't know what weapons or whatever anyone is carrying. No one's frisking you when you walk into a subway car. So I guess it may be understandable. Certain people would be afraid, but certainly you could say something without having to jump on somebody's back. Am I correct?
I think you can, and I think most people who do this kind of harassment are not going to take it to the next level and be physical, especially if there's a bunch of people around. You have to use your judgment and not jump on someone in a
what would you
lonely
recommend
place.
a bystander do? Bystander sees this, what does a bystander do?
I mean, I do think that it's really useful to use your phone, and you're going to hear more about this later, to kind of take pictures.
Okay.
And I think it's fine to say, like these guys were suggesting, excuse me, she's not appreciating that.
Wow. Okay, well, we're definitely going to have you back, not today, but another time, because I want to talk about to see how it's been going in the subways, and this is a very hot topic. But Professor, I want to thank you very much for being here.
Thank you.
That's my pleasure. All right, we have to take a quick break, but coming up, we will meet some New York-based organizations that are heavily involved in the fight to end street harassment. We'll be right back.
Mom, I'm not going to go to college.
What are you saying? You've got to go to college.
Well, they offered me a job, and...
Son, college is much more important.
No.
Yes.
No, Mom.
Yes.
Anyways, it's my decision.
Okay, well then decide what degree you're going to get, because you will go to college.
Their tomorrow depends on your words today. The Hispanic Scholarship Fund has the information you need to help your kids go to college.
Did you buy the flashlight and the batteries?
Yes.
Did you make sure we're not missing anything in the first aid kit?
Yep.
Did you go through the plan with the kids again?
Yes.
The more you prepare today, the more you'll be able to reduce the devastating effects of a tornado, an earthquake, a power outage, or any other disaster.
Hands can do incredible things. Now they can even help save a life with hands-only CPR. If you see an adult suddenly collapse, just call 911, then push hard and fast in the center of the chest until help arrives. Learn more at handsonlycpr.org.
Hey, how's it going?
Sir, are you okay?
What? Oh, this? It's probably nothing. I'm sure it'll go away.
Go away? But sir, that can't be good.
No, it's cool, really.
Do you want a napkin or something?
Everything's fine. Thanks.
You wouldn't ignore this. So why ignore the signs of a stroke? At the first warning signs, call 911 immediately, because time lost is brain lost.
Welcome back to today's verdict. I'm your host, David Lesch. Street harassment may be considered a taboo topic to try and fix, but today's verdict correspondent Christy Takahashi sat down with one group that is driving the extra mile to keep some New Yorkers safe. Let's take a look.
Giving the gift of safety is the motto of RightRise, a New York-based non-profit organization that offers free, safe late-night car service for women and members of the LGBTQ community. Founder Oriah Reed sat down with us to talk about the inspiration behind RightRise.
We started Right Rides in the summer of 2004 in direct response to an increase in assaults targeting women walking home by themselves late at night. And I'm a survivor of assault, and at the time felt very confident. I'm a young woman in the world. You know, New York City's still New York City, but I didn't feel unsafe. And over the course of that summer, I learned about yet another assault and yet another assault. And it was really devastating because I felt I wasn't safe in my community anymore. I didn't want to walk around. I felt like the only thing I wanted to do was shut myself inside. And my partner at the time realized that I was going into a very dark place and said, well, what do you want to do about it? And my response was, I want to give everybody a ride home. And so Right Rides was operational within 4 weeks, and we've been going ever since. We started off using our own car with 2 volunteers operating in 3 neighborhoods. And 7 years later, we are in 45 neighborhoods across 4 boroughs. We're driving our 5,000th rider home very soon. And we're made possible by 200 community-based volunteers. So truly, it's been a very organic growth because it's needed. The community really supports Right Rides and is invested in Right Rides because it shouldn't be a luxury to get home safely, and that's what we truly feel.
Right Ride is operational thanks to community-based sponsors and hundreds of dedicated volunteers, some who've been victims of street harassment or assault.
Right Rides is unique. There's no other service like it in the entire world, specifically to reduce sexual violence. So I think that it's been amazing to see that we've been able to grow and be sustained over this time, and I'm really proud.
For more information on getting a right ride home, call 888-215-7233 or visit rightrides.org.
For you. Hey, Mom.
You know, girls, I used to cheer back in my day. Ready? Okay! Go team!
That was amazing. Mom, that was amazing.
You don't have to be perfect to be a perfect parent. There are thousands of siblings in foster care who'll take you just as you are.
Welcome back to today's verdict. I'm your host, David Lesch. We want to hear from you, so send us your questions, comments, or show ideas to David Lesch at BronxNet.org, or check us out on Facebook at www.facebook/today'sverdict. Our next guest is the founder of an organization dedicated to ending street harassment by providing a platform for victims to reach out for help. Let's take a look at one of their clips.
It was 8 a.m. and I was on my way to work.
And over my shoulder, I hear,
and I wondered, what did I do to deserve this? I was dropping my kids off at school.
Then I felt him.
Was it something I was wearing?
I was walking my dog, and then I felt him.
Why is it always me? Why does this always happen to me?
And then I remembered I'm not alone.
I remembered I don't have to walk on anymore.
I remembered I could holler back.
I remembered I can holler back.
Then I remembered I could totally holler back.
If street harassment is okay, then groping is okay.
And if groping is okay, then beating is okay.
And if beating's okay, then rape is okay.
And violence against women simply isn't okay.
We're ending violence against women one holler back at a time.
Join the movement by hollering back and donating at ihollerback.org.
Joining us on today's show is Hollaback's Emily May, Executive Director and co-founder of Hollaback. Emily, welcome to the show.
Thanks so much for having me, David.
All right, now is it me or has this been happening for a long time?
You're right. This has probably been happening since the advent of streets and certainly since the advent of subways. Street harassment is a global problem. It's not just here in New York City, although certainly as New Yorkers we experience our fair share of it.
Right, from what I hear, it's happening in Tokyo, it's happening in Mexico. It seems to be a worldwide phenomenon and probably been going on for some time.
That's
correct?
right. And we're actually in 37 cities around the world, in 14 countries, in 8 different languages now addressing this problem.
Okay. The problem. Is the problem in the subways? Is the problem in the buses? Where does this seem to be happening, really?
You know, street harassment is anywhere in public space. So it is the subways, it is the buses, but it's also just the streets. You know, we see, particularly with the subways and buses, that they tend to be hotbeds for harassment because they're places where people are locked in and really sort of encaged for that ride until the next stop. So we see a lot of it happening on subway and buses, but we see a lot of it happening everywhere, unfortunately.
Well, how does it happen in the streets? I don't quite understand that. Is it somebody just kind of grabs you as you're walking past? They kind of like they just brush against you? Is that how it's happening?
Right. I mean, it could be anything from verbal comments like, hey, baby, nice bleep, or I want to bleep you in your bleep, or it could be, you know, groping can happen in the streets, public masturbation can happen in the streets. All the same things that you see in the subway also happen in the streets. The difference is that in the streets, you have a little bit easier time getting away.
Right. Let's talk about your organization. What is the goal of the organization? What are you looking to do?
Hollaback is an international movement to address street harassment, and our goal is to get people to share their stories and to use those stories as a mechanism to create awareness around street harassment and to ultimately bring an end to it.
Because it's funny, I have a friend of mine who, when I told that I'm doing the show on this tonight, said, well, that's been happening to me all the time.
Yeah.
And I would never have known that.
Yeah.
I guess what we want is we want people to watch and say, hey, wait a second, this isn't right, this happened to me. And by the way, if that is somebody watching this, what do they do? Where do they go?
Where do they go? They go to ihollaback.org, which is our website, to share their story. And my story is very similar to your friend's story. You know, I felt very alone. I felt like I was the only one, and I felt like I wasn't strong because it hurt me. And it was really realizing that, no, this happens to everyone, and everyone has the same reaction that I do. That was part of the inspiration for starting the site.
Were you able to find out who your attacker was, or did they just vanish into the crowd like most attackers do?
I mean, you start counting in verbal harassment, and you're not talking about one attacker. You're talking about, you know, multiple harassers each and every day that particularly are vulnerable or young people. You know, we get stories on the site as early as 5, 6, 7. I mean, this is not just something that happens to, yes.
What is the typical age range that this really seems to affect? Is it the young lady in their teens, in their 20s, 30s, 40s? What seems to be the sweet spot here?
You know, there is very little data, unfortunately, on street harassment, but what we do see is this age range between around 15 to 25 tends to be a time when people are getting a lot of harassment. It's one of the first times that young girls are allowed out on the streets by themselves. And it's also, you know, I think a time where people appear to be more vulnerable. They seem like they have less access to resources or, you know, to really combat what's happening to them.
Well, is it also happening during a particular time of the year, summer, because the clothing that people wearing is much more revealing? Is there a pattern? Is there something that people should be thinking about?
You know, people always assume that it's about clothing, and it's not. But what it is about is the fact that there are more people out on the streets in the summer. And we see that in areas of high population density, like Midtown or downtown or anywhere where there's lots of folks, that's where you're going to see the most harassment. But it's not related to what you're wearing, and women certainly aren't asking for it.
Right. No, I'm not saying that they are, but I'm just wondering if that's where you end up getting an increase in the type of harassment that you see, but it doesn't have anything to do with it.
Doesn't, except it has a lot to do with population density. So more people hanging out on the streets, more harassment.
Has your organization been successful in curtailing some of these attacks?
You know, Hollaback was founded because a young woman named Tal Nguyen was sitting on the subway and saw a man start to publicly masturbate in front of her. And she took his picture. And she took it with the idea not of sort of inspiring this global revolution, but she took it with the idea of giving it to the police. And when she gave it to the police were like, sorry, there's nothing we can do. He's already 7 stops away. This was back in 2005. And what she did is she put it on Flickr, and it went viral. And from there, it made it to the front cover of the Daily News. And ultimately, he was prosecuted. But we were so inspired by this woman's story because she was able to bring attention to something that people just don't talk about, considering how often it happens. And so the Hollaback site, we encourage people to tell their stories. They can submit optional photos, and they sometimes go and also report those things to the police, but obviously we help them report it, but we don't report it for them.
But as we heard earlier, the guest who was on earlier, the professor basically said that many prosecutors don't feel that this is something that they really want to take into the courtroom because they have so many cases that they pick and choose it looks like sometimes the victims are left out. Do you find that's happening, or do you think that, does it look like the prosecutors are taking these cases seriously?
It really depends. I mean, a lot of the cases that we see go into the public eye, and anytime something makes it to the news, it becomes an issue that obviously they want to catch the guy and they want to end it and this, that, and the other. People who their cases don't go into the media, essentially they will sit you down in the police precinct with a giant book of sex offenders, and if you don't start crying because out of fear for all these people could potentially be harassing you, maybe you'll find your guy in there somewhere. And then, you know, from there you can take it to trial, but it's very, very hard because your gut instinct is to leave the situation as quickly as possible, not to sort of grab them by the wrist and take them off to the police station.
Well, one more time, because it's so important. Can you tell us again, where does somebody go if they feel they've been a victim of this type of crime?
If you've been a victim of street harassment, you can go to our site at ihollaback.org, where you will find lots of resources on how to intervene and on behalf of others as well as on behalf of yourself.
All right, well, listen, that was great. Hopefully you're going to come back and let us know how the organization's doing maybe in the next couple of months.
I'd love to. Thank you so much for having me.
It is absolutely our pleasure. All right, well, that's all for tonight. It's now time to deliberate. I'd like to thank our guests for joining us and, of course, you for watching. Remember, if there's a legal issue or topic you would like to see on the show, email me at davidlesch@bronxnet.org. And until we see you again, always remember, know your rights, know your issues, reach your verdict. We'll see you next time.